So tonight I thought we could talk about a curious absence. So just the way we all grew up, um, we became quite certain that what we were was a separate individual self. It was almost a respected thing in this culture to sort of gain our own individuality and you know live life as a unique independent person, sort of making our own way. It's a highly respected value, and especially in this country, it seems. Right? So we sort of adopted this sense of separate self. We can't remember how that really happened. It wasn't a conscious choice. There wasn't a point where we decided, well, what I'd really like to be is feeling separate from the rest of the world and from other people. And I think I'll go with that. That's not how it happened. It just um, we just sort of followed the herd. Everybody believes that, and there didn't seem to be any benefit in questioning that until perhaps it began to feel like a limitation rather than a freedom. Um, at first it felt good to go out and experience the world as an independent self, seek the pleasures, excitement, the adventure. That's great. But at some point we may feel constrained by that, feeling like, it's the sort of the sense of at homeness in the world is somehow just beyond our grasp somehow, just over the horizon, just a short way, a little more effort and, we'll attain a state of perpetual happiness. We'll gain our goals and things will be good. So it's really only when we begin to feel the restrictiveness of that sense of separate self that we are even willing to consider other possibilities. So when, despite this sense that I know there's a separate self here, I'm certain of it, and yet when we're asked, well, where exactly is it? A person might, point to their head, or point to their heart, but people don't say, well, it's here, it's in my left hand, or they don't point to their knee or their foot. It seems like, the places a person might commonly point to is their head or their heart. And I think the reason for that is that we identify with thinking and feeling, the two sensations that feel most intimate as a part of ourselves. But when we start looking at that, does thinking define what we are? Does feeling define what we are? So we're not denying that there's thinking happening, thoughts happen. We can look, we all have had that direct experience where, we can, whether we're meditating or just walking across the room, we can notice that there is for most of us, almost all the time, there's this linearity of thought. One thought and another thought and another thought. And not really, hardly a space there at all between them. But they are linear, we can notice that. Feelings are a little more complex than that. They can sort of meld into each other and combine and flow. But the linearity of thought is quite specific. So we can clearly see that thought happens. What we presume is that there must be a thinker, therefore, right? But when we go looking for that thinker, it can be surprisingly elusive, right? We can see the thoughts clearly, and but the presumption that therefore there is a separate self in there somewhere that is the one thinking those thoughts and deciding which thoughts to think. Right? It's almost as if we imagine that there's sort of a backstage manager with all these yet to be thoughts that are sort of waiting there to go on stage, and the manager says, "Okay, you're next, go." And but that's not what we actually find. Um, we don't ever find the thinker of the thoughts. The thoughts are there. It's just the thinker is um, surprisingly absent. So what we do with that is say, well, no, that can't be true. That can't be right. Maybe I just haven't tried hard enough. Maybe I'm just not very good at this. Maybe I just need to look more closely. I'm sure that it's in there somewhere. Um, but this is sort of rejecting our direct observation in favor of our belief, right? Our belief is, I think my thoughts. That's our belief. So, but our direct experience is thoughts happen, and I can't pin down this thinker. I can't ever get a good look at a separate entity in there somewhere that's the one thinking. So our direct experience is that thoughts arise, and we can't even say exactly where they arise from, and they may hang around for a while, have a certain lifespan, and then sort of exit stage left in favor of another thought. Right? That's our direct experience. Everything else is a presumption. So what we can notice is that a thought arises, and there's something that notices that thought. Right? So a thought arises, and awareness is present. That thought, in a sense, appears on that screen of awareness. So we somehow, we can think, we can imagine that there is a unique association between, this body-mind and awareness, right? Every thought that we have, every feeling that we have, every sensation, other than the ones that are just immediately dismissed by the mind as irrelevant, but the ones that come to our attention, to our awareness, only our entire experience only ever happens within awareness. Nothing ever happens that is outside of our awareness. We have no knowledge of anything happening outside of our awareness. So that's pretty fundamental, right? And then this awareness seems to be associated with this particular body-mind. In other words, what I am aware of is my thoughts, not someone else's thoughts. What I'm aware of is when this body gets hungry, not when somebody else's body gets hungry. And I'm aware of what is appearing, in front of this field of vision, not in front of a field of vision of someone in Europe, let's say. Right? So it appears that the awareness is linked to this particular body-mind. But I'd suggest that what is That sort of conjecture is based on the assumption that this body-mind is primary, and this awareness is sort of in the vicinity, sort of somehow associated with this body-mind, maybe even generated by this body-mind from the brain. I mean, that's what um, scientists generally believe. But again, the um, danger here is to choose to go with our beliefs about what we've heard or what we've been taught rather than our own direct experience. So our own direct experience is that thought happens, awareness is aware of thought. Um, the only experience we ever have of thought is that which appears within that awareness. So from the perspective of this particular um, body mind, this is where um, perceptions and sensations and thinking happens in this body mind, right? The fact that this body mind is able to, receive and compile um, that information through, its experience of, prior events and understanding of, basic functionality of life, the body's capable of doing that. The body sees things, it hears things, it thinks things. Um, so there's no question about that. But the presumption that therefore, because the body has this capability, that therefore there is a separate self, is a leap with no proof. It's just a presumption that there must be, if this processing function is happening within this body mind that I can perceive, there must be somebody in charge, right? Somebody that I call I, me. The problem comes when we actually go looking very specifically for what that is. Right? And what we find, the only thing we find is awareness and what appears within awareness. That's what we actually find. So this body mind can, collect, compile, interpret this information, but where those images and feelings and thoughts are actually registered is in awareness. So this awareness, when we first notice it, it feels personal because it feels like it's located, in proximity to this body mind. So we think of I, me, the separate me, has now discovered this, interesting phenomena called awareness. It's something that I've discovered. I can visit it. I can rest in it sometimes. Sometimes it's peaceful if I can hang out there for a while. So it feels very personal that way. But and that's fine. I mean, that's sort of maybe the first glimpse when we open the door and look inside. That's the first appearance of it. And the reason that it's the first appearance of it is because we're still functioning largely from the perspective of a separate self. And we're still looking at awareness from the perspective of the separate self. We can have the sense of it to a certain degree, the sense of presence, the sense of quiet, the sense of spaciousness, but we're still looking at it from the veil, through the veil, from the separate self. So it appears to be, sort of nearby, personal. But when we actually look at it more deeply, we see that this awareness is curiously devoid of defining characteristics. You know, we can say that, well, it's peaceful, it's spacious, it's you know, enlivening, it's those kind of words, but that's actually more how this body mind feels in the presence of it than what is being um, what emanates from the awareness itself. The awareness itself is surprisingly absent of um, characteristics other than this knowingness, right? Not knowing facts and figures, but just the ability, the capacity to um, be aware. That's what it has. But that is where our entire life is being lived. It's what's happening already. You know, we take credit for it as a separate self, but what's actually happening is that everything is happening within awareness already. You know, so when we talk about you know, sort of the impersonal characteristics of this awareness, we realize that it is, by impersonal, it doesn't mean not intimate, right? It doesn't mean far away. It doesn't mean like it's a, you know, some distant entity that's come to visit us. You know, it is our deepest nature, our most fundamental nature. Um, but the impersonal, what makes it feel impersonal is that it doesn't have all the, um, you know, me, separate self characteristics that, you know, the identification as a body mind does. It's just aware, right? Just aware. So it's not impersonal in a sort of dismissive kind of way. It's totally, totally intimate. It's, you know, the most intimate thing to us. Even to say intimate is not correct because, you know, to say intimate implies two things, you know, me and awareness. It's not even that. There's not two things. What we essentially are is that awareness. That's the beyond any concept of intimacy. But um, by using that word, I'm just implying that it's not distant from us. It does. There's not a sense of otherness there. Maybe when we first encounter it, there is, but after a while, that there's not. There's just a relaxation in it as what we are, as what we essentially are. So this awareness, we come to realize, isn't personal. It's not our awareness. It's not being generated by this body mind. It actually is more fundamental than this body mind. Body mind actually isn't aware. It can function, it can receive, it can do lots of things, it can think, but the only thing that notices all of that is awareness. So that is how we are living our entire life. So that awareness is um, has an enlivening um, capacity on whatever it lights up. It's sort of like, you know, the sun shines, an individual flower receives that sun and colors appear, you know, by virtue of the sun shining. But it's not like the sun intends to light up that particular flower. The sun shines, it's just its nature to shine. It's just freely given. It's that, you know, originating movement. And it happens to be received by a particular flower, but not as a result of any intention or agenda by the sun. It's just an outpouring. So in the same way, the awareness um, uh, lightens um, this particular body-mind and every body-mind. It's perceived by this particular body-mind as, being in this vicinity, but that's because this is where the perceptions happen. They're registered on awareness, but they happen. This body-mind is required for the perception of, sight or hearing to be seen or heard. Those perceptions require a body-mind. So the body-mind requires awareness. Awareness doesn't require a body-mind. So when, this kind of, when we first hear this kind of talk, it's easy for the mind to rebel. It doesn't like to hear this. It doesn't like to hear that there's not something personal that is in charge. Because we've been thoroughly conditioned, we're convinced, we have this conviction that what I am is separate, that I think, that I make decisions, that I am the doer of my deeds. And, when that is questioned, the mind doesn't like it. The mind reacts often, right? So it can react by, being angry, being dismissive, just, being bored, being sleepy. Those are all strategies of the mind to, not want to hear this. But we can look at how things work directly. It's much more valuable to look for ourselves, what our own direct experience is, and to trust that. But what we've been taught and often do is to distrust our own experience in favor of what somebody else says, or what we've been taught over a lifetime. But it's really our own direct experience, the truth of that where the freedom actually lies. Because when we investigate it for ourselves, in our own direct experience, to the depth of our own satisfaction, then when we come to the answer as a result of that sort of no holds barred investigation, then it's our answer. It's not somebody else's answer. So I'm not in any way suggesting that one takes up this belief that, oh, I get it now. What I am is awareness. What I am suggesting is that if we don't know precisely what we are, is to hold up the possibility that maybe what we are isn't limited to this body, these feelings, these thoughts, that there may be something else more fundamental than this body-mind. If we don't know, and we've heard that, maybe awareness is more fundamental, then what we can do is just hold that as a possibility, not accept it as a belief. That's far less than useful. But just to hold it as a possibility, like, I wonder if that's actually true. I wonder if that could actually be true. It sounds, I guess to some ears it could sound like sort of a dry philosophical argument, but the essence of it is that if we believe that what we are is this body, these feelings, these thoughts, that's it. We can easily see that what we take ourselves to be is a perishable entity, right? And so, if we're living life from that perspective, there is unavoidably anxiousness, a sense of vulnerability, sense of trying to squeeze something out of life before it ends. But if we can even conceptually acknowledge, well, since I don't know, maybe it's worth exploring the possibility of, maybe what I am is awareness. I wonder what that is, because if that is found to be our true identity, then it raises the whole question about whether that awareness was present before birth, will be present after death. We can even ask if that awareness is alive. Valid question. Feels alive. Feels it's not an inert awareness. But it sort of depends on, how we define the term alive. If we define it as birth, life, and death, then can we say for sure that awareness is alive? Did awareness arise at our birth? Do we know that for sure? One thing that we can see directly in our own experience is that this awareness is formless. It's not of this world of form. It doesn't have a size, it doesn't have a color, doesn't change. It's always aware. Doesn't have anything to defend, doesn't have anything to protect, doesn't have an agenda. It's aware. But it does have this since it is where we live our entire life in that field of awareness, it does, you could say, it is what enlivens us. It is where that entire experience of living this life occurs. So the body-mind is dependent on awareness. Without awareness, we would have no clue whether we had a body, we didn't have a body, we existed, we didn't. All of that requires awareness. Awareness doesn't require a body. There are many times when we can just step back into awareness without any objects of perception, feeling, thinking, seeing, hearing, and just rest in that awareness. Awareness has the capacity to be aware of itself, self-aware, right? So awareness doesn't require a body. Body does require awareness. So there are times when, well, let's talk about the difference between functional thought and abstract thought. Okay, functional thought is not a problem. Functional thought, is just practical. It doesn't stir up judgment and emotions. And so functional thought can be something like, I'd like to eat spaghetti for dinner tonight, so I need to buy pasta and tomato sauce and onions and peppers, etc. And I need time to cook it. Functional thought. Abstract thought is things that we tell ourselves about or whatever's happening, right? So an abstract thought might be, my spaghetti's never as good as my mother's, never rises to that level, okay? So that, the one's mother isn't cooking spaghetti now, so it's sort of irrelevant. Comparing that to something else subjectively isn't happening now, except in our own head. And so here's an abstract thought that's introducing judgment, comparison, um, you know, these other things that create emotion that actually separate us from the very natural movement of preparing one's dinner. So we could, just one more example, we could have the thought, um, I'm beginning to recognize that many of my thoughts are um, repetitive and habitual. Okay, I mean, that's a useful observation, right? We say it without a lot of judgment or criticism or bemoaning the fact or anything. We're just saying it as a statement, a useful observation. Yes, they're repetitive. Okay, that's good to know. A abstract thought might be, my thoughts are habitual and repetitive, and if I was more spiritually advanced, I wouldn't be bothered by thinking at all. Right? So that's just a self-judgment, introducing a whole new self-evaluation. So this abstract thinking is what creates a sense of separate self. Creates a belief in some entity that is supposedly housed in this body mind somewhere that is separate from, well, everything else. Right? But this is just a belief. That's all it is. So when, in spirituality, when we talk about dropping the ego, or even more dramatically, ego death, what we're actually talking about is seeing through a misperception. Right? It's not like there's anything real that we're getting rid of. Right? This sense of the body's ability to register perceptions, feelings, thoughts, etc. That's all fine. I mean, that's useful. It's functional. The thought that therefore there's something separate here, separate from the rest of existence, that I can't quite put my finger on, admittedly, but I know it's there. That's a belief. So what is actually being dropped when we talk about dropping the ego is just that exact belief. Just a belief. It's not, but because we take that to be what we are, it feels like, our very existence is under threat here. Like, oh my God, I'm being asked to drop my ego. No, ego never existed. I mean, this ability of the body to sense and, experience its surroundings, sure, the body has that ability, but the belief that therefore I am a separate self in there somewhere, just a belief. It's just, so when this whole dropping the ego death is just seeing that belief is not true. That's it. That's the entirety of it. It's just seeing that there never was a separate self. We're not getting rid of a separate self. There just never was one. It's not present now. What is living life is awareness already, fully, naturally, beautifully. We get close to it sometimes, often during the day, but we don't pay it much attention. Like I think most people enjoy driving a car. Maybe not in a city or traffic or in a traffic jam, but because at those times you have to think about it, right? But when you're just driving and it's a nice day and you're just driving down the highway, you're not actually thinking about driving. What's actually happening is from the perspective of awareness, it's just this, you know, gaze down the road ahead of you, and your body knows what to do. Um, so there's not mental effort required. When we first learned to drive, it's all we can do to coordinate our hands and our feet and especially when we had the gear shift. I mean, that was a whole other level of complexity. But but after we've conditioned the body enough, we can relax about it, and it's awareness and function. We can also, if there was an emergency, a quick reaction was required. You had to, pull a child out of the way of an oncoming bus or something. There's no thought about oneself or whether one should or shouldn't do it or what'll people think of me or, none of that's happening. It's awareness and action. It's just sort of a bypassing this whole ability of the mind to think abstractly. It's it's seeing and immediately turning that into action. So there are many, if we're watching a good movie, we're not thinking about ourselves, right? Or we're listening to music, we're sort of, that's pleasurable because, for at least a short time, at least for, a 2-hour Netflix movie, a good one, we're not thinking about ourselves. We're willing to pay good money for that. That's why actors and musicians and sports figures are paid such high salaries. We value that highly, that ability to forget about ourselves for a short period of time. So this concept of dropping our ego, it doesn't mean that any capacity is lost. I mean, we're still able to, respond to our name. We're still able to do our job actually probably more effectively, because we're not always so concerned with, how am I doing? How will I be perceived, etc. So sometimes people will say, well, how about, if we say that awareness is already always present, we could say, well, how about at night? We, aren't conscious of being conscious and, in deep sleep. But let's just take dreaming first. If, at night, if we're having a dream, in that dream, we're totally convinced that what's happening is real. If we sometimes realize that we're dreaming and it's not real, then it's a lucid dream, and that can happen sometimes. But most of the time, we're totally hooked into the dream, right? So we might be dreaming that we're standing on top of a mountaintop, and view for miles and miles. And in the dream, the mountaintop isn't there. We're in our bed. We're not on top of the mountain. So the mountain isn't real, but the image is real. The image is actually being experienced, again, by our mental capacities to visualize on a screen of awareness. So that image is real. When we wake up in the morning, we say, oh no, that wasn't real, that was just a dream. And this waking state, this is what's real. But when we really look at it, we can see that what we have in the waking state that we think is as real as we thought the dream at night was, what we have in the waking state is still the same. We open our eyes, an image appears in our mind, and we're aware of that image. and we believe that it's true. So it's, in that sense, it's exactly as the nighttime dream, but we believe that it's more true in this waking reality. But in both cases, it is an image appearing within consciousness. That's how we live our entire life. But then we can say, well, how about deep sleep when, we have no dreams, we wake up and there is no memory of that period of time. There's no memory of any content, but there is a sense of the absence of content. That's what awareness is. Since it was just aware of itself in deep sleep, since it is formless, there's no content to carry out of the dream to remember afterwards. But that absence can be sensed when we wake up in the morning after a deep sleep. There's a sense of time having passed. Even before we open our eyes, there's a sense of, a gap, a deep, restful gap. So even then, awareness is still present. Awareness is always present. So when we talk about identity, where our true identity is housed, we can see that, whereas awareness is ever present, our remembering that we have a body-mind comes and goes. There are a lot of times during the day that we forget all about it. We certainly do in sleep. We forget that we have a body. When we're focused on something outside of ourselves, we forget that we have a body. There's a wonderful saying by Chuan Tzu, who was Chinese Taoist from about 26 centuries ago. He said, when the shoe fits, the foot is forgotten. Right? When everything feels good, feels natural, we forget about the body. When we have a toothache or bellyache, we remember it. When we have a busy mind, we're conscious of that. But when everything is going pretty well, we forget about the body and we're more just focused on the environment around us. So this awareness is what is continuously present. What gives us a sense of having been the same from as far back as we could remember, even though the body's changed, all the cells in the body have changed many times over, opinions have changed, situations have changed, etc. But there is a sense of continuity, and I'd suggest that continuity is due to the fact that this awareness is ever present. Whether we are paying attention to it or have never noticed it ever in our whole life, doesn't mean that it was absent for any of it. Right? It's just that awareness, presence for whatever's happening. We might be totally engaged in some silly activity. Awareness is there for that too. It's not just for peace and stillness. So that continuity is a function of awareness, not of this body-mind. By saying that when we don't remember this body-mind, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that it goes out of existence. It means that it is not it's not where our fundamental identity is housed. It's a beautiful beautiful organism capable of many, many things. And it's just a delight and a pleasure to be associated with it, to view life through it, to engage in life through it, to participate in life through it. Beautiful. And yet, the identity as awareness gives us a freedom to do that. Freedom, openness, recognition that what I fundamentally am is also what everybody else is as well. It's actually the fundamental basis for compassion, is the recognition that that awareness that is functioning here is totally undifferentiated from the awareness that's present everywhere else. The appearance is certainly different. Appearance that flows through this conditioning, this all these experiences that this body mind has had, it's going to look different than that which is expressed through another body mind. But the essence is not different in any respect. That's the joy of it, the beauty of it. And that's where oneness actually is found. It's not by trying to merge a sense of separate self and through longing to be part of everything else, because that's just coming from a sense of separation and desire. It's not that the desire is wrong, but the methodology is. When we can see that it's not a high state, it's not a state of great desire, and it's just that it is the how things actually are, right? That's the joy of it. That's the beauty of it. And it's also the freedom of it, the freedom to fully engage in this life.